Podcast. I'm Lauren Tocci.
And I'm Ryan Tocci. This is the one place we hope to not have any uncomfortable silences.
I don't think there is such a thing as silence in the director's films that we're going to be talking about today.
That is absolutely true.
Well, welcome everyone. We are on episode 3 of season 2. We are two people who fell in love at a movie theater and never quite left, and we're here to talk about all of our favorite debates in film knowledge.
It's apropos that you actually say that, because I actually got, one time working at the movie theater, a promotion from this company for this director, and I got a bunch of DVDs for this director.
Did you really?
I did, yeah.
You got, like, perks?
I got perks.
I got butter stains from working at the movie theater.
I was high up.
That's true, you were management. Well, whether or not you were joining us...
Doug Ward knows what I'm talking about, because I think he got a couple of them, too.
Fantastic. I would just picture that, like, if you're getting promos, it's like Flair. Remember when we used to get, like, the pins in for the different movies?
Oh, yeah.
And they would so awkwardly sit on that polyester vest. They were the worst.
But you did definitely want as much bling as possible.
I had a Garfield one. It was so ugly. I hated it so much.
Bill Murray doesn't even want you to say that.
Oh my gosh, I forgot Bill Murray's the voice of Garfield. Oh, all right, let's move on.
But I will say that was by far the best perk we ever got.
Not the Coca-Cola ornaments that still hang on our Christmas tree.
That's true. No, that was a cool one, although we don't have the DVDs anymore, but it was cool at the time.
Because they're DVDs.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time to the podcast, or if you are a longtime listener, one way you can really help us out is whatever platform you're listening to us on, not watching us on. If you can leave a review.
If you're watching us, it's a whole different concern.
Please let me know how you're doing that. I have so many questions. But whatever platform you are listening to us on, if you can leave a review, hit subscribe, really helps us out to get a little bit more visibility and get this out to more people, because that's something we want to do, and hopefully you agree.
Yeah, and we can they can see your drink of the podcast.
Oh, yes. If you follow us on Instagram at How Could You Podcast, you can see my drink of the movie, where I come up with some original recipes, or maybe I'll try some, like, if we do a movie that has an iconic cocktail, maybe I'll try and make that. So just like another way to kind of enhance your film viewing experience. If you want to revisit these movies, you can do it with a cocktail.
They are tasty beverages.
I'm glad you like my tasty beverages. They're a lot of fun to make. I get very frustrated. I make 15,000 dishes when I'm trying to come up with them, because I'm very clumsy in the kitchen.
And here's your obligatory drink responsibly.
Drink responsibly, everyone. So Ryan, how was your week?
Well, let's see. I got a gigantic Q-tip jammed up my nose and into my brain, so that's always fun.
That's cool, man. We can talk about that if you want to.
I just did it on my own, just for the heck of it.
We really need to find you some new hobbies.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing about that is, like, all you hope for is that you're having this done for no reason. And luckily and blessedly, yes, this was for no reason in this particular case, but damn, is that the most uncomfortable thing?
It sounds like it's the scene out of Clockwork Orange, honestly,
it's
when you describe
Clockwork
it.
Orange, kind of mixed with the episode of Treehouse of Horrors when Flanders takes over, like 1984.
Oh yeah,
and they take out the brain,
and they let you keep a little part of it.
Yeah,
hello,
it's pretty much how
that was my mo, by the way, in case anyone was curious.
It's a great mo.
Thank you.
I'm hoping at some point we can fit the Simpsons movie into this, just so you can create the flaming mo for your How Could You Podcast drink.
I am not making you a drink with cough syrup. That's dangerous. That is not responsible.
Right. We don't need to worry about the Q-tips messing with my brain.
Well, other than that Orwellian task that you needed to do this week, we also watched the movie One Night in Miami.
That was, what'd you think?
Phenomenal. I mean, Regina King is so immensely talented for a directorial debut. I mean, it's just like, well, it's kind of that feeling of like, well, you've got me for your next 5 films. And it's a movie that I don't know how to describe this except to say, in this Oscars year, every single person in that cast should be nominated. And that should be it for the categories.
Yeah.
Because all 4 of the major players, so if you don't know this, the film is taken from a stage play that imagines a night that did actually happen. It is inspired by true events where Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke were hanging out in a hotel room together. And it puts you in that world with kind of obviously some imagined conversations that are, designed because of where each person was in their career and in their activism. But it's incredible. And every single scene, like one person kind of takes center stage in the conflict. And it's just the performances are so mind-blowing. truly cannot recommend this movie
enough.
enough.
It's flawless. It's trying to take a stage production and put it in film doesn't always work, and she just nails this. It's awesome, and everybody is so fantastic in it. It's like you said, all of them get their own moments to shine, but nobody ever steals it. Like, it's just across the board, just terrific.
It's like the perfect, like, almost like composition of a film where there's never one thing that's taking such precedent that you're like, oh, okay, I'm only noticing that part of the film. Everything works in such concert, almost like jazz music together. And, like, there's a hotel space that feels like how she shoots it. It feels like 15 different spaces. I don't know how she did it, like, what the camera positioning was, but you feel like there's such, in what should feel like a really confined space, it feels open because of how she places the camera. It's such a great movie. It's available on Amazon Prime if you have Prime, and let's be honest, I think we all do, and they have our DNA. But if you have Prime, it's free to watch. Highly recommend watching that movie.
I agree completely. I actually like this too. Should we do this as a recommendation of the show every week, every time?
I like that.
Yeah, we might have to do that. Let us know, audience, if you like that idea.
I'll put a post on Instagram. Respond to it if you think that's something you want to hear from. We try and be pretty good about watching new releases as they come out. We've gotten a little bit behind, just because it happens. And One Night Miami was one of those ones we were really, really hoping to watch and just were absolutely blown away by.
Yeah, definitely.
And raptured us from the beginning.
Before we get into the heart, also, I wanted to give a shout out to our good friend and trivia master of the Lehigh Valley, Steve Boss.
Yes, if you don't know Steve, follow him on, he's at Questionnaire55 on Instagram. His Facebook page is Steel Trap Trivia and Smarts Quest. He has been providing in the past year free trivia to the Lehigh Valley just to get people to gather, to give them this like wonderful distraction. We were lucky enough that we would play his trivia, in real life, when you could go out, and we always had the best time. He asks really challenging, awesome questions. He's incredibly funny. And he has been a phenomenal support of this podcast since the beginning.
Absolutely. We can't thank him enough for all the support he's given this show, as a fan and just, promoting us. And it's meant a lot to us. So, we really can't thank him enough for that.
Yeah. And he listens to the podcast while he cleans his apartment. And I think that's delightful.
Great,
I like getting to be a part of that.
But ultimately, too, it's just he's a good time. He's a great host. And his trivia shows are just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And if you play it virtually, you get the same experience, and it's he did a great job adapting to this situation. It
truly feels like you're having a night out in your house. Like, definitely. I can't recommend it enough. It's so much fun. He does really awesome themed episodes, and his knowledge base is encyclopedic. Like, it's insane the amount, especially when he gets into those theme episodes, because you think, how could he know so much about everything? It's phenomenal. Can't recommend
Steve Draws is always my favorite category. Where he'll recreate a poster and you have to guess what the film is. So
I like Steve vacation photos.
Yes, he takes a shot from some location, and usually the question either is about that or about the film that location. So always a good time. Definitely check it out. And again, we're so appreciative of his support, and we can't give enough support back to him.
Exactly. So let's talk about the film this week. So we started this.
I feel like the music should be playing.
It really should be. Yeah. I feel like we're doing a disservice by that very curated soundtrack. And I mean, if you want to play it lightly in the background while you're listening to this episode, all the credit to you. We started this season talking about Seven and talking about how landmark in so many ways the 90s were in cinema in terms of directors coming along and kind of turning on its head the movie industry, being visually inventive, changing the conversation of how independent cinema is discussed and who has access to independent cinema because of so many of those independent filmmakers, having mainstream success. And it's impossible to not continue that conversation without saying, today we're going to talk about Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction.
1994, R-rated, all its glory, iconic film, yes.
Without a doubt. And such like an interesting, so if you don't know a lot about Quentin Tarantino's background, although I have a feeling if you're listening to this episode, you're probably already a fan of his. He was high school dropout, worked in a video store in LA, and just watched and consumed film. And that's how he becomes this like auteur, because he spent so much time just studying the works of the masters and also studying things that would be considered kind of low art, but like he just consumed everything and wanted to know as much about movies as possible, and probably in any room probably has, you know, speaking of encyclopedic knowledge, probably has the most knowledge of film and pop culture of like anyone in any room. And, you know, he wasn't someone who was an insider in the industry. He really honestly, like how he gets started is really based on him just kind of being scrappy and trying to make connections and being kind of like, you know, right place, right time a little bit, but also someone, you know, who, you know, just was so dedicated to this art and really found ways to make his films. And starts with Reservoir Dogs and then, you know, certainly ramps up with the film we're going to be talking about
I mean,
today.
his writing alone, I mean, I can only imagine that Tarantino's brain must move about 4 times faster than most people's. Like,
and I think that's at the minimum.
I mean, you know, you could take his blood and it would just be caffeinated. I mean, it is amazing what he can do, and his writing obviously gets him in the door. But his unique brand of direction is what highlights him. And
his screenwriting abilities, like how he constructs conversation. And I think a lot of that comes from kind of that manic energy that he has. Like, you even think about like how this film deal gets done. I mean, it gets done on a paper napkin. Like, Lawrence Bender comes into a video store. It's like, and that's how this gets signed away. And he goes and like, you know, flies away to Amsterdam to write this in a notebook where he literally wrote in the notebook, I'm going to write Pulp Fiction. And, you know, you think about 1994 and where we are, you know, in cinematic history. And I always like looking at original reviews when we're going to talk about a film that was like so landmark. And here are some things that I found. So Jayne Mansfield, famous reviewer for the New York Times, wrote about this. You don't merely enter a theater to see Pulp Fiction, you go down a rabbit hole. And then she continued to say that this is the American Graffiti of violent crime pictures.
What a fantastic review. It's amazing. And
then in addition, this is probably not on like as good a score as that, but someone wrote, despite the drugs, violence, the language, the grit, Pulp Fiction is fundamentally lighthearted. It's fluff.
But it's not wrong.
It's not wrong. I don't think the person meant it in a complimentary fashion who wrote that review, but...
You know, there's something I was going to wait till later to say, but it just has to be said right off the bat before you get into this film. Pulp Fiction is one of the most original and unique films you will ever see. It's never been replicated. You've not seen anything like it before. You haven't seen like anything since. And even in Tarantino's own films, you've never seen anything like it. It is its own thing because it's hard to really narrow down what exactly it is.
Well, and I think too, like, and this is where it becomes so important because it's a weird movie that exists in its contradiction of, you're right, nothing has ever been made like it before or really since or in his career. I 100% echo your sentiments, and at the same time so heavily referential to things that came before.
Yes.
So it's really interesting how he, and you know, again, we talked about postmodernism a little bit in our episode about Seven, but again, like that idea of like pastiche and like how he's like pulling these things together to be able to, you know, create something entirely new from a history of things that he had consumed. It's such a really interesting way to approach filmmaking. And certainly how this film, there's a really wonderful like deep dive, I think it was Vanity Fair or The Hollywood Reporter did it like a few years back on like the anniversary of the film. So it had to be like in 2014. And looking at how this film comes together and Tarantino's part, how it gets cast. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the cast. Like, you know, simply the fact that like he went to Travolta and said, I've got 2 movies, Pulp Fiction and Dusk Till Dawn. And Travolta said, I don't like vampires, and that's how he ends up in Pulp Fiction. That alone
and again,
is insane.
Things we'll talk about probably, obviously, but it resurrects Travolta's career. I mean, the chance he takes on Travolta, because Travolta, now, we're probably on the backslide of Travolta's career again, unfortunately, but at the time, he was, you know, not bankable at all, and for Tarantino to take that chance on him was huge, and it shot him back up in the stratosphere.
Paid off. Can you see anyone else playing Vincent Vega?
No.
Yeah, for sure not.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, so what you're saying is this is like an all-time film, right?
Yes, I am saying that.
But you're saying that this is just one of those films that any lover of film needs to see, right?
I am saying that, Ryan Tocci.
So it brings the most important question to this podcast. Lauren Tocci, how could you not have seen Pulp Fiction?
So, okay, well, one, I was 8 when it came out. I was just like,
that is no excuse.
You're right, because, I mean, my parents played very, very fast and loose with ratings, so that shouldn't have been, that's really not a barrier in my household.
Got 260 uses of the F word in it, so what, that's, you know.
I mean, that was just daily, you know, household count of using the F words. I don't know if really, you know, so, okay, so I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know that I have a reason, and the weird thing is if you were to say, like, okay, how could you not, and then this was the first Tarantino movie I ever watched, you'd go, like, okay, you just hadn't done the Tarantino thing. But the thing is, I had seen so many of his films before I saw this one.
Yeah.
Up to the point of, I had seen The Hateful Eight before I ever saw Pulp Fiction. So it's a really weird thing, because I will say this, because you say this so importantly, and it is so unlike his other films, but I don't think you can understand Tarantino as a director without seeing this movie.
I mean, this movie is so Tarantino. Like, that's the thing about his films. There's unique blend of, you know, Tarantino-esque, but they're all of their own thing, you know? Like, they're all their own individual, unique blend of filmmaking, but you're right in that if you look at the film, you're going to almost know it's a Tarantino film had you not known that going into it.
Yeah, and honestly, I had seen it so, like, referenced in pop culture, and it was one of those things, like, I knew I should have seen. It just took me a really long time to watch it.
And when was the first time you saw it? So, you know, we do that on the How Could You podcast, and generally, when we were talking about that, it's recently, so I think it was a year ago, maybe.
Yeah, about a year and a half
approximately.
ago. So here's why, because I saw it before we watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I think it actually had a lot to do because that was coming out. It also is because I would have very boldly said for a while that The Hateful Eight was my favorite Tarantino film. But it felt really false saying that, having not seen Pulp Fiction. Like,
yeah,
you know, it felt like, how can you really define what your favorite Tarantino film is if you've not seen the thing that really, you know, catapulted his career? Even though this comes after Reservoir Dogs, but this is the thing that most people probably remember him for.
Yeah.
And it's probably the film when you point to, because it becomes so, like, iconic in film history, which is what makes it so interesting that, like, so much of, like, film history goes into how he crafts his style, but now he's become like a master in that realm where he's kind of created his own style that now becomes like so like landmark within cinematic history. So it's a huge gap, or was a huge gap in my film knowledge. It was something that, again, even though I thought I knew a lot about it from a pop culture standpoint, when I watched the film, I realized I really knew very little about it. So that's the other thing I would encourage. If you think you know a lot about this movie and have never seen it, you really don't. You have to watch it. You have to watch it. And I
think you see more even as you watch the film. The more viewings you have, the more things you pick up on, the more things you see with it as well.
100%, because I think the first time watching this movie, it's such like an assault on the senses of like everything that's happening, both things that are, you know, entrancing and things that are repulsive. Like, so your mind is just trying to piece together, what did I see? And even if you take out of it for a second, like the fact that it's not told in a linear fashion, like, so then you have that kind of thing that happens at the end once you realize that it's not being told straightforward. And like, there's so much about the film that, like, it only can really, I think, be appreciated upon repeat viewings. And I hate saying that about any movie, because to me, it's like, I think things should be able to stand on their own. And I think this does. If you only watch it once, if you only watch it once, it's great. If you watch it multiple times, I think you're rewarded for that, which is an exact comment I said about one of his other films, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You were rewarded for repeat viewings.
Yes. And I think, and obviously, I'll ask this question up front, because I think we all know it by everything you've just said. You're a fan.
Oh my gosh,
you're a fan of this film, you love it.
I love it.
So we're kind of getting that out of the way. But I think that's also the important thing to talk about with this film is we're going to talk glowingly, I think, about it throughout this entire podcast, but it's not a movie that if somebody came back to me and said they disliked, I wouldn't think anything of it. It's not that type of film. However, it's the type of film that anybody that loves film needs to see. It's too important. It's too important in the way that it was shot, done, and its place in quote-unquote pop culture history that it has to be viewed.
Yeah, and something that, like, I think you and I talk a lot about with film is, like, you can watch a film that's, like, quote-unquote, like a classic film or a landmark film or is revolutionary in cinema and not like it and still appreciate what it did. Like, because you have to appreciate, what this does, in terms of, again, we're talking about that, like, independent film story, which to me is always so weird, like, once a director has, like, kind of shot into the stratosphere to talk about, like, their indie origins, because it can almost, like, feel false. Like, well, yeah, Tarantino's a household name, but he wasn't. And
well, yeah.
And he had to scrape to get these films made.
You and I talked about this recently, and it's going to be a weird comparison, but I think you'll follow my through line here with it, is he comes along about the same time that Kevin Smith is coming along.
Oh, yeah.
Both are coming up through, the same production company, and they have these kind of highlighted independent type films that start to, really shine them on. Now, Tarantino, he's just kept growing, like his direct, and so this is why it's so incredibly important. Now, Smith's, unfortunately, doesn't quite ever... He kind of peaked out.
I think Kevin Smith stays niche. I think that's the thing that's different, like where... And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of people who are like, well, I can't, like, dig... like Tarantino's vibe for a lot of reasons. But like, I think the difference is like, I think Kevin Smith stays like in a specific universe, whereas I think Tarantino gets kind of this, like, again, it's that auteur theory, like kind of praise that he gets like associated with. But I think it's an apt comparison because you think about, like, you essentially had these directors coming up that were showing, like, you and I always talk about, like, Nerd Boys made good. Like,
Yes.
it's one of us that made good
right.
on getting to be in that conversation. And obviously, I think Tarantino takes it to another level. Whereas, like, something I think you and I have always really appreciated about Kevin Smith is, like, he becomes essentially like the king of San Diego Comic-Con. Like,
right.
Like he gets to kind of stay with that base in a really cool way.
Personality more than anything.
Yeah, 100%.
And this isn't a shot at Kevin Smith by any means. Not. It's just talking about, like you said, that kind of nerdy, coming up independent filmmaker and what they're able to create and then go from there.
Well, and it's interesting too, is like, as we start to, I think, now like transition to talking about the movie itself, like, so Tarantino is kind of brought up on, like, he was a really big fan of the film theorist Pauline Kael. If you've recently watched the film I'm Thinking of Ending Things, this name will probably be pretty familiar, but so Pauline Kael, like, so she was like a champion of the high-low trash art aesthetic, which is a really good way of describing, like, kind of Tarantino's approach and explains a lot about this film. Like, how do you, because so the film opens with a definition of the word pulp. It's a smarmy thing because it's like, okay, do you think I don't know what the word means? But like, okay, but I like that you get the two definitions side by side. Both it's like pop culture definition and then just like the word pulp, because I think in a lot of ways, like, the first definition is actually more appropriate for the film. It's a lump of mush, this film, in a lot of ways, because it's pastiching all these things together. It's bringing all these portions together. But then I like it's that definition of, like, so it gives you a genre expectation for a movie that is going to constantly untether you from reality. It gives you a way of understanding the movie from jump. I'm to understand that this is pulp. So, like, what do we associate with pulp? It's trashy. It's a little more scandalous. It's got that 1930s film noir vibe. Seedy people, seedy situations, underbelly of society. So it gives me the immediate thing I need to know at the start of this movie of, like, no one is likable at all except two characters. And say there are only two characters in this movie that are likable.
Sure. Two.
There are two.
Oh, no. There's nobody is.
Okay, Mia Wallace, we're going to get into this, and we're going to argue about this. Mia Wallace is phenomenal. What's wrong with Mia Wallace?
Besides the, horrible coke addiction?
Okay, but here's the thing, and this is actually what I love about...
Or the fact that she's married to one of the worst mobsters.
Like in LA. Yeah. So here's the thing I'm going to say, is that immediately when I say that of, like, likable, is, like, I think there are, and this is where I think Tarantino's always done a really good job at showing you essentially, like, people in society that you have absolutely every reason to hate. And then what I really love about Tarantino, he does nothing to redeem them. So then you're kind of looking for, because, like, in the pulp tradition, there's always kind of, there's the blonde kind of, like, damsel in distress that, like, needs to be saved. And, like, and I think, like, Fabiana and, like, Mia Wallace kind of, like, function in that way because they are a little bit more of, like, those lights of, like, you can understand, kind of like moth to a flame. Like, I think, and essentially everyone's a moth in the movie, and they're the kind of bright lights of the movie. And, like, the reason I say Mia is very, like, easy to love or easy to kind of be, all right, maybe this is my obsession with, like, 90s Uma Thurman, but, like, easy to be obsessed with is because of the fact that, like, yes, she's a coke addict and she, like, ODs in the film. But I think comparatively to the accidental, that she didn't know it was heroin. And, like, but comparatively speaking to everyone around her, like, yeah, she is a lot more redemptive because comparatively speaking to everyone else around her, it's like, that's not that bad.
Not a high bar there.
No, it's not a high bar. But that's the tradition of pulp.
I have literally written here, is Mia one of the coolest characters of all time? So
she is.
She is.
It's her. Do you know my other character that I say is highly redemptive and I love? Jules.
Well, yeah.
Jules is awesome.
He's awesome. He's not redemptive, but we'll get there.
Oh, no, hold on. Not redemptive, but Jules is so awesome. Sorry, so we'll work through this film. So we open this up with, the pulp definition.
Can I get one elephant out of the room right off the bat?
Sure.
And it's changing tone a little bit. God, does that Miramax title card not make you just sick to your stomach?
It really does.
And it upsets me, like, legitimately. Nothing aside, because there's so many films that I just love from Miramax. And Dimension, which is another, part of it. And it just hurts every time you see it, and it just makes you nauseated to just go, you bleeping son of a bee.
Yeah.
Like, I just hate it, because those films were just amazing. And for you and I, especially, like, anybody that grew up in the 90s, like, these were those films in the 90s that we grew up on.
Yeah, and they were revolutionary, and it's really hard. And, like, so, if you're not, like, wholly aware of history here, so Miramax is Harvey Weinstein's company, or the Weinstein Brothers company, and, like, and certainly if you follow the trajectory of that news story, obviously why we're saying this, and it's really hard because a lot of the films that were really changing cinematic history in the 90s were unfortunately by the control of the Weinstein Company because of how far-reaching their control was in so many ways, unfortunately. And, like, so it's immediately nauseating because you're like, I have to still participate in this thing that was created by a monster. But he's not the creative.
He's not the creative, right.
And, like...
I think, you and I have talked a lot about that, of trying to... how you navigate the understanding of these types of situations from an entertainment standpoint.
Essentially, the only thing you could do is it would have to be the creatives who put out films via Miramax now retaking the rights of their films and redistributing them underneath different studios. It's the only way to kind of, like, right that ship. I mean, like, I hate to compare it to this, but, like, in similar ways, like, Taylor Swift putting out her albums, like, an artist retaking control of it.
Yeah.
And it's, like, and that's really complicated. But I also think, like, in many ways it can be important to go, like, we have to kind of, like, reckon with, like, what, unfortunately, so many artists were either completely unaware of or completely complicit in during that time. And I think it's important to look at that in film history for no other reason, like, for it not to be repeated again. But I don't disagree with you. It makes it a really hard entrance point the second you start watching a movie and the Miramax thing comes up. 100%.
So, unfortunately you have to talk about some of those things sometimes, but that was tough. That just, like, I don't know why it hit me even harder last night when we were watching this and going, or whenever we watch this week, and just going, ugh. Like,
you have to talk about, and, like,
what used to feel like yay turned into just this horror.
Well, it's kind of like if all of a sudden there was some scumbag who's in charge of A24. Right now.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, like, all the movies that come out via A24's umbrella.
Absolutely.
Like, if all of a sudden that was turned kind of sour, you would have that. And I'll say this, like, at least the nice transition here is that Tarantino gives us really awesome opening credits.
Yes.
To be a little bit of a palate cleanser.
Away.
Yeah.
Do you like the definition of pulp? Like, do you like that type of opening?
I do like that. It also made me think, did Kevin Smith totally rip that off when he did the opening Dog with him? Because you were just talking about that. I like the definition of it. It does feel, so I have two minds of it. Like, I feel like because it allows us to understand that throughout the film and throughout Tarantino's understanding of, like, art and culture and language, there's a constant ambiguity of where he stands. So you provide us with two definitions when we only really need the one, but it's also that ambiguity of, like, am I saying that you're not smart enough to get this, or am I trying to get you to analyze what do I mean by pulp fiction? Do I mean it by definition 1 or definition 2? So I like that. I also unapologetically love long opening credits.
Gotcha.
And I will not apologize for that. One, because you get that amazing opening song. you get all of, like, you know, the cast of characters, casting agents, writer, like, you get all of that stuff listed. But I love a long opening credits. I love that anticipation. It's also very much like that was something that was done, you know, during the 1930s, 1940s, and even to the 1950s, long opening credit sequences. So I like it, and I love it when it has nothing to do with the story other than just giving you names. I like it. And
I don't know. I don't, because for every Pulp Fiction 7, you get Speed, which just puts you to sleep.
No, and here's the thing. I'm discerning about it. I don't need a long opening credits that provides me with, like, a lot of, like artistic renderings or helps to establish story. I just like a really plain opening credits, like what Pulp Fiction does. It's a great song and a list of names. Thank you.
Give me Scream, quick title card, and we're right into the action.
Is that both the best and worst title card of all time?
Yes. Just the best.
The best. Okay, just the best. Okay. And then, you know, we're brought into this world.
Pumpkin and Honey Bunny.
Oh my goodness. Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. It's a really harsh entrance. And I think what, you know, the immediate thing you have to, like, deal with like a Tarantino film is certainly, like, again, we're talking about ambiguity of language, but he has a really troubling interaction with language and how he uses it. So essentially, like, the one, you talk about, like, landmarks of Tarantino films. Well, you can't have a Tarantino film without a racist white dude starting it off. Like, right. That's essentially, like, unfortunately, is one of, like, the hallmarks of his film. He has a really interesting way in which he interacts with language, like, both the vulgarity of it, but also, like, racial epithets. And this has been written about, like, a lot and extensively, and a lot of debate about Tarantino's, like, interaction with language and where to kind of place him. He's been criticized heavily, specifically by the director Spike Lee, you know, for his use of racial slurs throughout his film. There's actually an entire course you can take at Harvard University, which is called Race, Racism, and Quentin Tarantino. And it frames it as trying to look at, like, how he writes characters is this. Is it racist writing, or is he writing of racism? And Tarantino is very, like, if you've never watched an interview or read an interview with Quentin Tarantino, like, he's like the definition of arrogance. But, like, it's this weird, like, almost like you feel like he has to put it on because he's still, like, the video store clerk. Like, you know, and not that I think anyone still thinks of Tarantino in that form, but there's almost like that weird, like, no, I belong at the table. And, like, he really doesn't defend, he doesn't apologize. He tries to make sense of it, but never in a cogent way. So it leaves a lot of, like, open for interpretation. And you get that right in the beginning with, you know, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, like, talking in the way in which he's just so casual with language. And it's like, you have to decide, is this a guy who's so flippant with what unfortunately is parlance of the time? Is he wanting us to understand, like, no, everyone in this movie is a scumbag, and you need to understand that because that's part of the pulp world? Or is there a commentary in that? And the thing is Tarantino's not definitive about any of these things, but people write definitively about how they feel about it. So it's like you open this up immediately, and it's like a 2-minute scene. What is that scene? Is it 2 minutes? I don't even think it's that long. Immediately gives you a lot that you have to work through and criticize and figure out. And that's, honestly, if nothing else, is kind of the worth of a Tarantino film, is, like, every single second is worthy of interpretation. And it's both really frustrating to be a fan of him as a director, and obviously one of the greater joys of being a fan of him as a director, of trying to figure out, like, what is this guy's perspective on things?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then you get to, you know, be with the people that I really honestly wish the entire movie was about. Vincent Vega. And Jules.
Just the best, right? They just got great chemistry.
Excellent. The best lines. I was just writing quotes, like, rapid fire as we were rewatching.
I love that you take these two characters and we get this conversation that really has no bearing on the entire film about McDonald's in Europe. And then, you know, but it really builds these two individuals. Yeah,
for sure. And it builds, like, and again, like, here's another thing of, like, ambiguity of language. Like, why do you care what a quarter pounder is called with in Paris? But it's, like, important, like, how we name things, what they mean in different places. And, like, you kind of have this, you know, so the cool thing with Vincent Vega is the whole thing is he's coming back from Amsterdam, which is cool because that's where Tarantino was writing Pulp Fiction.
Right. Oh, yeah.
You know, so there's, like, this immediately, like, worldliness, like, added to their conversation, and, like, and they're two people that are, like, talking through, like, I love the morality at which how they talk about someone rubbing Mia Wallace's feet.
I was going to ask you, is that infidelity?
Yeah, 100%.
Is it worth being dropped off a 4-story building?
Let me tell you something. Somebody's rubbing your feet, I'm dropping them from a 4-story building.
Fair to know, listeners. Fair to know.
No, but I love the way in which they talk about that, because it's just this interesting conversation where the consequences of it are so dire, and it's them just trying to work through the morality of this.
But just their nonchalantness going into this house that they're going to end up having to, shoot these men and get this thing, and they're even talking about it to the point where we should have brought the shotguns.
But the fact that they won't go into the apartment, so it's too early.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
It's very much, I love that sequence because it feels like an updated 90s version or 3-minute version of Waiting for Godot.
Right.
Whenever the two of them are talking, I feel like I'm watching Waiting for Godot. And I mean that as the highest compliment.
Sam Jackson, in this movie, is he at his peak? Especially in the apartment?
Two things. One, I love how you just referred to him, Sam Jackson, like your buddies. Samuel L. Jackson.
Sam Jackson. I met Sam Jackson.
Yes, you did. All right, quick diversion. So I have to, because I'm going to explain it from my perspective. We found ourselves at a Halloween party, and this is going to sound like vicious name dropping, but it was M. Night Shyamalan throws
exactly what this is. Not sounds like.
So M. Night Shyamalan every single year throws a Halloween party called Shyamoween, and we went, and it happened to be that they were filming Split, and so the cast of Split, including Bruce...
No, I'm sorry, Glass.
Yes,
yeah,
sorry. Yeah. So the cast of Glass was there. So Bruce Willis, dressed as one half of the Grady twins from The Shining, and Samuel L. Jackson, and so the entire cast was there. And Ryan talked to Samuel L. Jackson, and
Sam Jackson.
I'm sorry, Sam Jackson. So he talked to Samuel L. Jackson, and it was Samuel L. Jackson, first off, it just had to be just about the nicest person. I didn't get to talk to him, Ryan did. And you always get worried that you thought you were bothering him, but he greeted you with such generosity, as though this was just a normal party and you were just coming up to him like a casual acquaintance. He was just, and honestly, to see him kind of in that party for, the hour or so that he was there, every bit as cool and amazing and everything you want him to be, 100%
yeah,
is.
he's Samuel L. Jackson when he walks into a room.
There was
a
a charity auction happening, and he was trying to essentially
do you remember he took it over?
He did
because
take
they
it
weren't
over.
getting enough
and not high enough bids. And he's
this
is for charity, and he took it over, and it was the best thing. It was honestly one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So anyways, but back to the movie.
You also talked to M. Night for 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure you invited him to our house or something. I don't know.
It was
you guys were best buds.
It was the weirdest experience, and him and I talked about the village, and it was very, very cool. And you weren't around. I'm oh my gosh, my husband's gonna be so upset that he missed this. And he literally held my hand and said, "I promise you, I will meet him." And he met you later that night.
He did.
He was a very all right. Sorry.
I'm glad he held your hand and didn't touch your feet though. So otherwise,
well, all right, yeah. So back to Tarantino and the feet. But so this whole opening sequence, and I think the really cool thing about it is you very much want to live in that friendship and that world for as long as possible. So anytime you get that portion of the film, it feels like such a treat because it's so well established in the beginning. And then we transition into the chapter that's going to be about Mia and Vincent, but it opens with talking with Butch in the, obviously the thing that's going to be kind of the most, significant scene, I guess, towards the end with the delivery of the briefcase. And it's Butch. And I love that Tarantino makes the decision to play Let's Stay Together at the same volume as Marcellus's dialogue.
Yeah.
Because, it really, puts you in that space, and you have to really just focus on how Butch is reacting to this information where he's being asked to throw a fight. And I just really love, and obviously so many of the music decisions are so important in this film, but I also thought, the volume of music can be really important in a scene. I thought that was, a really interesting way to handle their dialogue.
So that gets us to Vincent Vega getting to Mia. And my question to you actually right off the bat, and this will go into the next few, does this film take place in our universe? Or is it its own little alternate universe?
I have to think about it as it's this imagined version of LA, where essentially it's almost what you would think LA might be, if you were kind of in that that crowd, because one of the interesting things I think about this movie is, and I'm sure we'll talk about as we talk about these scenes, is it's kind of it's a few different film genres all at the same time. So it's like, it's, you know, it kind of feels like, you know, it's like a French love story. And it's also this like groovy, like kind of like 70s, like pulp film. And it's also like a Bonnie and Clyde tale. And it's like noir. And like, so, you know, I think it's an imagined universe inside like a cinematic universe. Like, I almost think it's like someone's story that's like in a movie.
Yeah,
like, I don't know. It feels like very layered.
There's so many things, and not necessarily because of this, but like I even think about the drive-in sequences and how he chooses to shoot the drive-in sequences, which are just fantastic.
Oh, of
with
course.
This very old school background. You know, it's just, you know, you're in this. And I get a lot of times there's so much going on during those scenes, but I just think it's a very cool way to do that and to put you in that world.
Well, and then to do objective shots where you actually are seeing the car like turn like in the real world. It's like this weird like honest like meta thing that's happening, or like how when it's Butch in the taxi cab, the entire background of it's in black and white.
Yeah. Yes.
Like that's such an interesting choice,
right.
And I think it's because like, you know, he's supposed to be occupying this like the boxer who's supposed to throw the fight like pulp trope of like now he's gonna have to run from the mob, so it like puts you in that like 1940s, but like he really just needs like a fedora and like a cigarette in his hand, and like all of a sudden you're in that 1940s like noir world. Yeah, I totally agree with you. But like if this did exist, I would be at Jack Rabbit Slim's every weekend.
Well, I was going to say,
be my spot.
Is that our dream restaurant?
That is literally our dream restaurant.
I hope Steve Buscemi is actually there too to be our waiter. So, and I might have to get. I hope every place starts asking me if I want my steak bloody as hell or, you know, burnt to a crisp.
I really honestly, because let's be honest, those are really only the two cooking temperatures, at least in this household. And then additionally, it's like such a cool, like, again, like a molding of like pop culture of like getting to see all of these like fake versions of the actors and like being in that like mid-century modern retro like setting, and you're sitting in old cars, but like Vincent drives an older vehicle. Right. So it's like it's this weird thing.
Cool. You know, this is this moment in this film to me that is the film. Because you take about a 10-minute scene, whatever, I don't know the time length, but you have two actors at the top of their game sitting just back and forth dialogue that becomes some of the most iconic dialogue in film history.
Don't be a square.
You know, you have, you know, two of the coolest characters, or at least perceived coolest characters in film history.
100%.
You know, the way that it's shot, and talking about the layers of what is happening in this scene and what that conversation's going. You know, because is there a better couple that's not a couple in film history?
It is the best condensed, like, non-romance romance ever. Right? Because it really just, like, it's all about them just having this moment where they have the, you know, the big dance-off.
The gumption on Tarantino to take this type of film and then just drop this dance sequence in this middle of this film. I give him all the credit, because from the choice of song, you have Travolta, who again is not this huge bankable star at the time, doing basically the Batusi at some point during.
That's what he was yelling at him when they were filming it.
That's perfect.
He yelled at him, "Do the Batusi." Yes. Like that's literally what happened. I think it was Tarantino shot that you know, because like the first 30 seconds of the song are just like shot like objectively, so you can just see them dancing before it like pulls into the closer shots, and I think that's where you get kind of into that more like romantic, like flirtatious tinge. But I think he does that just to remind you, like, hey, audience, in case you forgot, the dude can still dance.
Yeah, it's just...
That's how it feels.
To me, that scene is Tarantino's career in a nutshell.
Oh, yeah.
He just has the guts to do the things that he knows is going to work that other people wouldn't believe would work. And it's just, again, it's in his filmography, is there a more, and you've used this term a lot, iconic scene in his filmography? No,
I don't think so. I think you could search for, there's a lot of really great scenes, but I think it'd be hard to argue that this isn't, if you wanted to give someone like a sense of like who Tarantino is, that you wouldn't show them that scene and just, or even just that sequence of like from when they arrive at Jack Rabbit Slim's, like the fact that she like draws the square on the screen and then like, again.
It's actually a rectangle, but you know.
Yeah, whatever. Fine, don't be a rectangle. But she draws the rectangle on the screen, and then like kind of their entrance into this world, and then like the discussion of like the $5 shake, and like.
I love Travolta's reaction to the $5 shake all around.
It feels genuine.
Oh my gosh,
$5 for a milkshake, like, you know, and it's. There's so much about that sequence that I think just screams Tarantino. Again, it's like kind of that like homage to like all of the different parts that make, like, Hollywood cinematic culture, you know, but, like, the idea of, like, you know, essentially they're getting served by, like, Buddy Holly, and, like, that's so, like, it's, like, how bizarre that all is, but it works so nicely, and again, like, it's kind of, I think, the cornerstone of his film career.
And then that leads us to the OD scene.
Yeah, which is...
Shout out to Stoltz.
I hate Stoltz so much. I hate
awesome in this movie.
Stoltz is the worst human being ever. I hate Stoltz so much.
Wait, are you talking on a cellular phone? Why are you calling here? Prank call. Prank call.
Here's the thing. Because, like, immediately, I'm like, and again, we've been talking about this, like, he's such a garbage human being. And, like, he's so awful, and I hate him so much, and it's to me, it's all his fault.
How's it his fault?
You just feel bad for him because he wasn't in Back to the Future. Like, I cannot stand.
Rosanna Arquette's face and how she where she just gets giddy, like, I have no idea what's gonna happen, but I want to see it.
Yeah,
like
it's all of us because we're like, is she gonna die? Like, because, like, this movie's totally different if that, like, scene ends differently.
Oh,
like,
right, yeah.
You know, so it's this whole, like, super bizarre, and this is the thing I love about the decisions in this movie. He will go, okay, this moment, this movement functions like this type of story, like this type of film. And then he goes, left turn. No, it doesn't. Now she's ODing on heroin. Like, because, like, everything before that, it kind of feels like those groovy beach party movies because they, like, dance together. And then, like, there's, you know, and I love the scene of, like, him in the bathroom, like, trying to tell himself, you're going to have a drink. You're going to be polite. You're going to go home. Like,
if she doesn't OD, do they hook up?
No.
Nah.
No, because I don't think, like, because I think you're not supposed to think of Mia in those terms. I think it's just she's that, you know, like, not, you know, something that I think comes later in kind of, like, film history. She's a little bit of that, like, manic pixie dream girl, like, where I think it's, like, it's a playful thing, like, you know, like, it's the...
Yeah, it's just her personality.
Exactly, and it's, like, you know, another kind of, like, filmic trope, like, you have to take out, like, the mobster's girl, and, like, you know, so I don't think anything happens, but, like, I think that's the thing, is, like, we assume that that's what's gonna happen, and then you would think the rest of the movie is worrying about if Vincent's gonna get killed or not for hooking up with Mia, but no, she then ODs, and we end up in Stoltz's house. Who's the worst?
But then we move to what I'm gonna call as my low point of the film.
I can't stand Butch's storyline. It bores me.
It is. It's there. The scene with him especially the scene with him and the girlfriend in the hotel room, who I will have to say that is probably your only redeemable character, although she's also the most boring character in the entire film, an infuriating character in the entire film. And when they are in the hotel room, I'm checking out. This film would be higher on my Tarantino all-time favorite list if it wasn't for this probably 15 minutes of film.
And I think it's because it goes into a different cinematic genre for a while, where now it's all of a sudden, so you've kind of had the loud of, like, that previous sequence, and now you're, like, in this, like, again, it has that, like, you know, it's that romantic boxer, they're trying to get away, and a lot of it, like, truly honestly beats like a 40s noir film, like, and I think that's because it slows down the pace. And then, like, additionally, because you have, but I like something that Tarantino does that I think is smart, like, within these sequences, is, like, again, it's all those left turns, because it's like he has, like, the you know, the war veteran coming to tell the story, and then the story is so grotesque for absolutely no reason. You're like, you wouldn't tell that to, like, an 8-year-old, like, that's how the watch, like, got to him. But it's, like, so grotesque. It's best
that it's done by Walken, right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Because he does it, like, so, like, stone-faced, Walken style, and then, like, but, you know, and then it's the, you know, kind of, they have to get out of town, like, you know, he's made this mistake, like, they have to get out of town because he made this choice, and then, like, they're having to go back and get the watch, and I love, like, the moment where, because it's very much, like, it's so referential to Psycho when he's at the intersection, and it's Marcellus walking, and stops and looks at him, but unlike in Psycho, where the boss keeps walking, Marcellus, like, stops, and then you get this other left turn.
But before that, we get the Vincent Vega killing, which comes out of nowhere.
It really does.
Like, I mean, when you're watching, you're like, whoa, did they just kill him off just that quickly and abruptly?
Maybe that's why we don't like him, because he kills John Travolta. So we can never, like, really like him.
Quick fun fact, do you know who Vincent Vega's brother is?
Oh, it's Thingy from Thingy, and I'm losing the names.
That's okay. Vic Vega, Mr. Blonde
from
Blonde.
Reservoir Dogs. Yeah, yes. Sorry. I knew that there was I know that, you know, there's a lot of theory about, like, the interconnected, like, Tarantino universe.
And I like how this is foreshadowed earlier with the scene at, you know, Wallace's bar or restaurant or whatever that was, with the two of them. and their eye contact and when they meet up, and then to have that shot there.
Yeah.
And then I agree with you. That's very referential of Psycho when he sees Marcellus out on the street to lead into one of the harder scenes to watch in the film, but also, again, I hate the iconic imagery and costuming. I mean, because everybody's going to know that scene of them two with the ball gags being tied up.
And the gimp.
And everything. I mean, heck, The Simpsons did a whole thing with it.
Well, and then, like, that's, like, it's like a hard, because there's, like, a really, really challenging scene, but you get, like, one of the best lines, and I'll obviously bleep this out, but, like, where Butch asks him, are you okay? And he says, I'm pretty blanking far from okay.
That's a great
because
line.
there is, and then it's, like, again, like, I think Tarantino makes you interact with violence in this really weird way, because it's, like, you don't want to see what happened to Vincent happen, but you also completely want to watch Marcellus go medieval on the guy who has just assaulted him. Like, you want to see that violence enacted. And I think he makes us interact with violence in a really interesting way of, like, kind of making us think about, like, you know, we come, like, you know, jury and executioner, like, oh, that violence doesn't feel okay, but that violence I need to see because I need to know that revenge has happened.
And that moment where you're getting Butch trying to decide which weapon that he's going to use. Like that little 30 seconds that he puts
where
in
he's
there.
like, which one do I... And I'm like, just pick
There's no
weapon.
urgency in him in that moment.
No, because he's a bad person.
Yeah.
But I do love his line when he's on the motorcycle. Zed's dead, baby.
Zed's dead. Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing. I mean, how many classic quotes are in this film? I mean,
it's very quotable. And then, like, you know, to transition to, like, and I even feel like this next sequence becomes, like, really the Bonnie situation. Because really, like, because you think that Bonnie's going to be some major player, but she isn't. She's literally just like, this guy cannot have his wife come home and there's a dead body. And, like, Tarantino, like, again, like, it just a movie filled with deplorable characters. But I do like the wolf.
We all need a wolf in our life, first off.
I think, here's a challenge, podcast audience. Figure out who the wolf is in your life. Because we all have one. We all have that person who's our fixer.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, you probably are the wolf for someone else.
But I agree with you. The wolf is maybe the best character in the entire film.
And I love that, like, idiotic moment with Vincent where he's like, he wants a please. Yes. And the wolf, like, you can tell, like, the wolf probably knows 95 different ways to kill you. Shut up. But then, like, he just, like, he handles... I love that he's in a tuxedo at, like, 8 o'clock in the morning for absolutely no reason. And I love that
Jules just loves him. Like, Jules is like, that is just one cool...
Like, yeah. And, like, just, like, how, like, he's like, oh, the wolf's gonna handle things. Like, we're waiting for the cavalry to come in. And just, like, how, like, matter-of-fact the whole process is. So it almost, like, again, makes you kind of feel the matter-of-factness. And then, like, the nice thing about that is you get to be back in a space again with Vincent and Jules, and you get that amazing and iconic speech where, you know, he's reading, is it Ezekiel?
Yeah.
I can't remember what the passage is. Ezekiel 25:17. You get that, and then the whole diner sequence then.
Which I didn't realize is actually an amalgamation of the Bible quote and something taken from a Kung Fu film. That it's actually not... Yeah, it's combined. It's not the exact quotation.
I was curious about that. Again, this is where, like, Tarantino plays a lot with, like, language and boundaries of language and references. So I was kind of curious if there's something that's so super interesting.
I like, because there's a couple of thoughts too. Because the diner scene, I don't believe when Honey Bunny talks when they bring it back, she doesn't say the line in the same way either, which I always found interesting.
Oh, that's right. No, she doesn't.
By the way, Samuel L. Jackson in that apartment, he's so funny and terrifying. Like, the way he plays that is just terrific. And then, like you said, like, just these moments, like, the Marvin getting shot, and you're like, what?
Oh, I know. Because it's so jarring in a movie that is just filled with jarring moment after jarring moment, and then you just have that, and you're like, what just happened?
Jarring, and then you're laughing because of how
how they interact, and, like, and I love when they're cleaning it up, and, like, Jules is like, why am I in the back seat cleaning up the brains? Like, this is really, like, it's just these great moments, and that's the thing, is this movie is so weirdly funny.
Yes.
When it has no right to be, but it's so funny.
What's your feelings on Tarantino as an actor and the Jimmy character?
It's so self-serving.
It is, but he's great.
He's really great.
He's got to know when he puts himself in. It's got to be the right spot, right way. I think he works as Jimmy really well.
Total dirtbag, but yeah, he works really well.
Because Jimmy's character doesn't even make sense completely on how he's connected with Jules.
No, like, you have no understanding of it. You're like, he tries to, like, it's seemingly like, almost like he's tough-talking Jules, and you're just like, what is your malfunction? And then just he's so concerned about the linens, and I'm like, what is this movie? What is this moment? It makes no sense. But again, like, and I do think this is where Tarantino exists in these, like, very weird, like, again, like, I can't know the way to describe it, like, Waiting for Godot moments, where it's like, if you just read it at surface, it's like, it can be really confounding what's happening, but, like, there's so much intent there. It's really interesting.
So it leads us to the big question of the entire film.
Yeah.
What's in the briefcase?
What do you think is in the briefcase? Are you asking
the biggest
me?
MacGuffin of all time in film is the briefcase. I mean, I obviously don't think it's supposed to have. I think you are, as the audience, supposed to make up your own, I will go with the theory of, to me, it is the soul. It is Mark Wallace's soul and him trying to get that soul back. Yeah. From the Band-Aid, whether that was a costuming choice or whether...
But it feels like that's where it came out from, yeah.
And the moment that I completely believe it, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is when they shoot Brett in the apartment and the flashes of gold come up. And to me, that's Brett's soul leaving his body. Yeah. And to me, it harkens back to the soul that's in the briefcase. And the briefcase is... lock number is
666.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. And I also think too, like, the fact that, Jules's meditation on miracles, and the fact that he's quoting or misquoting, like, a Bible verse, and the fact that they don't get shot and it doesn't make sense because the bullet holes, like, line up with where they were standing. Like, I think there's so much done that I will 100% agree. I've always thought that theory made a lot of sense.
You're talking about that with the miracle moment where Jules accepts it. Jules understands it. And what happens from there, and Vincent, who's a skeptic and doesn't believe in it, and everything that happens to Vincent after that, between the Mia situation and then ultimately the being shot by Butch.
Well, yeah, and because he gets shot in an apartment when Jules isn't with him.
Right.
Yeah, so you have to kind of wonder if there's, like, supposed to be something, like, kind of divine there, which, again, like, becomes, like, really interesting, because it's like, am I really supposed to think that there's something mystical happening with these kind of this, like, seedy underworld? Because, like, again, that feels like, but that's not supposed to be how, like, a pulp thing functions, that there's something, like, mystical happening. But again, that's, like, a really cool, again, Tarantino, like, left turn of, like, saying, no, that's what's going on here at the end of the movie. It's fascinating.
Yes. So, that's our kind of feelings on the film. It leads you to, this film was highly popular from the get-go. Yeah. Soundtrack, obviously, through the roof. Would you say one of the all-time best soundtracks?
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. One of the, like, so best curated soundtracks.
But that's the beauty of Tarantino's films. He curates soundtracks that are just, like... There are songs that a lot of times you're not going to necessarily know where to take them. You know what I mean? You're not going to necessarily jump out and pick those songs yourselves, but he makes them just beautifully work in his film.
Well, it's great because it's like...
Perfect.
I don't think I knew the Chuck Berry song.
Right.
You never can tell, but it was like, I love that song. You throw it on, I'm going to start dancing right away. Yeah, he just makes so many smart choices.
So we have to talk about Oscars quick.
Oh, yeah,
right?
for sure.
Because this is a huge film.
And this is normally the time of year.
So, it gets nominated for a lot of different Oscars. Most notably, original script, and Tarantino wins.
Yes.
I believe his only Oscar, if I'm not mistaken. He may have won another one recently.
For Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, yeah.
Okay, yes. Looking at that, it deserved to win, no question about it.
For sure.
The one notable was I was happy to see Heavenly Creatures was nominated that year.
I love that movie.
Such a good movie.
Peter Jackson directed.
Everybody should check that one out. Acting or film? What do you want to go first?
We'll go film.
So, up for Best Picture, the 5 pictures up that year: Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Quiz Show, and Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption should have won. There's no question in my mind.
Yeah,
and I know we've talked about Pulp Fiction for an hour, but no.
No, Pulp Fiction, it deserves to be in the conversation, and you take out Shawshank, I'm going to pick it, but it certainly... Yeah, Shawshank is all-time to us. And Forrest Gump, it's a show for another time, but to me that's going to be on my how could you most overrated films of all time.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that.
I would say that's a whole nother argument.
But it's hard not to talk about Forrest Gump because Forrest Gump cleans up
Yeah, it does at the Oscars.
Director Tarantino gets beat out by Zemeckis.
Yeah.
No, should not have. But I also would have said Darabont.
Darabont should have won.
I don't think Darabont was nominated.
No.
I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Supporting actress, Uma Thurman loses Diane Weiss for Bullets Over Broadway. You and I are probably going to both agree.
Uma Thurman should have won.
Uma Thurman should have won that one. Supporting actor, Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, your buddy.
Loses to Martin Landau. And this is a weird one, because Martin Landau was up for Ed Wood as Bela Lugosi.
Oh, gosh, you love saying it that way.
Absolutely love. But this was Samuel L. Jackson. How he lost. This was the Oscars choosing to give a Lifetime Achievement Award to Martin Landau.
And here's the thing, Martin Landau's great in Ed Wood, but the problem is like Samuel L. Jackson is like the essence of cool in this movie. And like, I mean, listen, it remains that way, like obviously throughout his career. He's a phenomenal actor and he should have been awarded because like, you know, there's a lot, you know, you can kind of look at this and go, is this the most iconic Samuel L. Jackson performance? And there's an argument to be made there, but Samuel L. Jackson's a phenomenal actor. And I know I'm just saying something that everyone already thinks. And it's so disappointing to think of him not rewarded for this role.
Agreed. I agree completely. Gary Sinise happened to also be nominated for Lieutenant Dan. So that's another notable there. Then that's the weird one here. Actor John Travolta gets nominated for Best Actor. Tom Hanks wins for Forrest Gump. Again, I'm not the hugest fan of Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks is great at anything, so it's hard to argue with Tom Hanks. I definitely wouldn't have said Travolta, as much as I think Travolta is so good in this. The weird thing about this category is who also was nominated. Morgan Freeman gets nominated for Shawshank as Best Actor, which I can't... I mean... Tim Robbins is Andy Dufresne is the lead actor in that film. Morgan Freeman should have been supporting actor.
I mean, an argument for another time for sure, but I'd say they're co-leads.
Do you?
Yeah, I would say if you...
Because he is the narrator and steering the film.
No, but I would say that I would have immediately... If I didn't already know that, I would have assumed he was nominated for Best Actor, and he 100% should have won.
But would you then say that Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson, that would be...
Yeah, well, because... Vincent Vega's in the movie
he
more than... Yeah, because you have to remember there's an entire chapter just about Vincent Vega's journey.
But I have to say, Pulp Fiction should have won more than what it got.
Yeah, it should have been more recognized. I think that this is a... You know, so the Oscars have really, like, complicated history about, like, how things are awarded and what films are kind of heralded. And, you know, Pulp Fiction comes out now. I think it's a very different conversation, but also... It's a completely different cinematic history if Pulp Fiction comes out now and not in 1994. True. You know, I think there's a lot to be made about the types of films that the Oscars award. I think it's getting better. That road is much longer and more arduous to get it to a place where I think you can honestly, objectively look. And art is so phenomenally subjective, but I think there are many years where the Oscars get it wrong. Yeah. This is a year where they got it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, but there's going to be a lot of defenders of Forrest Gump that are going to disagree with it.
For sure, and I think there's an argument there.
Yeah.
I'm just saying from my personal perspective, I don't know that Forrest Gump...
Although, you know what I would say is a good back to Forrest Gump soundtrack, though, to me? One of the all-time best.
Oh, it's a great soundtrack. Yeah, how they got the rights to all of that is still insane to me.
So, I mean, obviously, Pulp Fiction is Tarantino's baby. All these acting, you know... deserve all the credit in the world, but it's Tarantino film. So it leads you to kind of... We're not doing recasting this week because there's no recasting other than obviously Ben Schwartz and Bill Hader as Jules and Vincent Vega. I mean, there's no question there, right?
I'm going to kick you off the podcast for saying that.
But
I'm going to drop you from a fourth story.
Let's do our top Tarantino films. You can't talk about a Tarantino film without talking about top Tarantino films. And these are going to be our favorites, right?
Yeah, our favorites. So I did a top 5. I know there's like obviously the impulse to just take kind of all of his films because like there's the thought that like he's going to end after 10 he'll be done.
Yeah.
I just took a top 5. That was the way I wanted to handle this. So I did my number 5 is Kill Bill Volume 1.
Okay, so we're not doing Kill Bill as a whole.
No. We
can separate the films.
Two very different films.
Good, I'm glad. That helps me with my list.
Two very different films. So Kill Bill Volume 1, I have very fond memories of the first time seeing that. I also have very fond memories of seeing Volume 2 with you, like an after hours showing at Carmike. Like, Kill Bill Volume 1 is incredible, such a cinematic achievement. Number 4, Inglourious Bastards. Brad Pitt's performance in that.
He's so good.
Him
and Eli Roth,
Eli Roth is genius. Like, I think, honestly, I am more here for Eli Roth's acting career than his directing career. He was great in that. Then number 3, The Hateful Eight. Again, like, I love Kurt Russell in that movie. Dom Margaux was played by actress's name who's completely going out of my head. Jennifer Jason Leigh. Like,
I feel like you did that on purpose to me.
I promise I didn't.
You know my love for Jennifer Jason Leigh.
No, but her as Dom Margaux, like, it's a really, and again, like, a really condensed story, like, because I think the worlds of Tarantino can feel so big and expansive, and this is not. This is very intimate. It's in, like, a winter cabin. Love The Hateful Eight. My number 2 is Pulp Fiction. That's not how I always would have ranked these, but Pulp Fiction on rewatch and kind of researching has hit the number 2 spot. And my number 1, and I will defend this to the hilt, and I have no problem saying it, my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Excellent.
I think it's his magnum opus in a lot of ways. And I know I just said Pulp Fiction is in a lot of ways, like, his best film, but there's something about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to me is a very special movie, and I will be fully honest, I did not like it the first time I saw it. In fact, I came out spitting vitriol about it. And then we watched it a second time, and I was like, okay, and then the movie started to open like a flower for me.
It's a great how could you topic of, how could you dislike this movie the first time you saw it? And I can say for you, I remember you disliked it, and by the time we got around to the Oscars and you had seen it a second and third time, just absolutely loving it. And
if I'm being honest, like, when I hit stop on this, I'm going to try and convince you to go watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood today, because I love that movie that much.
That's a great list.
How about you?
Obviously the Tarantino films are funny because I think they're just so personal to people of, like, it's not a shot at any other film when you don't rank it higher, right?
No, for sure not.
So, I mean, for me, I wanted to put Inglourious Basterds, I didn't, so I ended up going 5, Once Upon a Time.
What?
I know.
That's another conversation we're going to have after this episode.
But you can't argue with my list I'm about to give you either.
I have a feeling I can.
So number 5, I'm giving Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Similar to you, I didn't enjoy it as much the first time. Once I was able to kind of understand how I should be watching the film and which narrative I was supposed to be watching it and viewpoint I was supposed to be watching it from, it completely changed the film for me and has been I love it. Number 4 actually is Pulp Fiction. Another movie that just keeps climbing for me the more I see it. Mm-hmm. Number 3, Kill Bill Volume 1. Give me the last few minutes of that film, and just, I'm in all my glory.
Yeah, it's a great
film.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, another great score, everything. Number 2, Hateful Eight. You take a 4-hour film and just make me so engrossed in it of just putting people in a cabin for 4 hours. It shouldn't work, but I'm just...
And again, awful people.
Just awful.
Awful people.
Well, that's what you're talking about. Jennifer Jason Leigh to me is one of the most despicable characters of all time, and I love her in this.
Oh, she's so good. She's so awful, yeah.
But yeah, just the entire cast, he just picks the right cast for him. He knows how to do that. And then number 1 is gonna be a nostalgic thing. It's a tough watch as an adult, knowing the dialogue, but I still love this film, and it goes back to what we talked about, everything you were talking about earlier with Tarantino's dialogue. Reservoir Dogs, to me, is my all-time favorite Tarantino film. I loved it when I first saw it. I haven't stopped loving it. It's... like I said, some of the dialogue is a little bit difficult, but you have to understand how you're going to frame it in your mind of how you're watching it. These are despicable people, so the dialogue works really for them, even though it's sometimes very uncomfortable to watch. But it's a really well done film. We get everything else from Tarantino because of this movie. Yeah. And Steve Buscemi, to me, is just fantastic, but the whole cast is just great in it. But I mean, obviously, I loved Mr. Pink. I used it as like our aim,
Mr. Pink 655321
sign-ons and things like that. So it's to me, it came out when I was in high school. And it stayed as that top film. And maybe a lot of my decision to put it as number 1 is nostalgia. But I stand by it.
It's your entrance point for Tarantino. Well, it's everyone's entrance point for Tarantino. And, and the thing is like, the thing is you and I have talked about, like, Tarantino is not a director that is easy to talk about without talking about some of the challenges of his films and trying to situate him of like what is his position within these conversations. How do I reconcile what I'm watching, the characters that he forwards, you know? And I think sometimes it comes down to that analysis and try to understand like what he may be trying to convey as an artist. Reservoir Dogs, I mean, that iconic scene with Michael Madsen stuck in the middle with you, like, if for nothing else, like, that film is, but, you know, and I think that's where he's a really challenging director, because when you think about all of his, like, his collected works, it does become hard to rank them. I feel very solid about my list. I don't know how you don't have Inglourious Basterds in your top 5. It's honestly, it's aggravating to me.
But it's like I said, it's not anything against the films that don't make my list. I don't think there's one I dislike of his. You know, I think I need to re-see Jackie Brown, and you know, I'm not a big fan of Django Unchained, but
I've heard a lot of, like, I've had people, like, because I'm not a fan of Django Unchained, and I've had a lot of people say to me, like, reasons to rewatch it and try it again, and maybe I need to, because certainly the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood experiment worked with that. Euro is a big proponent of give a film a second watch. I am not. I'm normally arrogant enough to think.
Sometimes hard, though, to give a film a rewatch that's, you know, 2+ hours when you start getting into those higher, longer films.
And I'll say it, like, I'm arrogant enough to go, no, I know how I feel, and so a lot of times I don't. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a really great case study for that.
You know, and the one thing I do want to say about quick about Reservoir Dogs is just that I think why that film so resonates is because I never seen anything like it. This fast talking dialogue like it was. Yeah. These pop culture references, like when Tim Roth is talking about The Thing, you know, and these moments that he puts into it, and you know, and it's a gritty lower budget film. Like it just, you know.
Was it made for like $500,000? It was something ridiculous, like some small budget. But here's the thing, and I think this is important, like...
And then you put that soundtrack in it.
Yes, but movies that help us to awaken to a new way of watching film, or help us to awaken to there's more than these genres, there's also more to looking at, like, independent filmmakers. You don't have to go for your big budget box office popcorn flair. Like, I think movies that do that for us, whether or not they're brilliant or not, become really important to our own personal cinematic histories of, they'll always be special because of what they awakened us to in filmmaking.
Well said, as always.
Well, with that, everyone, if you're not already following us on Instagram, please follow us at How Could You Podcast, on Twitter at How Could You Pod. You can always send suggestions or thoughts. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of thoughts about our Tarantino picks to howcouldyoupodcast@gmail.com. Please, if you have a moment to, leave us a review, hit that subscribe button. You can check all of our social media pages to be abreast of when our new episodes are coming out.
We hope you enjoyed the show. We hope you inspired you to rewatch Pulp Fiction, or if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, again, how could you not have seen Pulp Fiction? Until next time, enjoy the Odyssey.